Hi, welcome to Crime Family. In this episode, we talk about a case that has only been deemed the House of Horrors. It talks about torture, abuse, neglect, and starvation of 13 children, all at the hands of two people who they should trust the most. Now, since this case has a lot of disturbing facts, listener discretion is advised. So with that being said, let's get started. This is the case of Louise and David Turpin. And before I start, do any of you guys, have you heard about this case or know anything about it?
Yeah, I did hear a little bit about it. I think I watched a true crime show on it once or something, but I don't know all of the little details or anything. So I'm interested to listen.
Yeah, it's been a while since I heard of it, so I can't really remember exactly what goes on. So yeah, I'm ready.
Before I get started, I'm going to take you back to David and Louise's upbringing, just so you can get a good understanding of their childhood and what it was like for them growing up. So, I'm going to start with Louise. She grew up in a little town in Princeton, West Virginia. She attended Princeton High School and was part of the Bible Club in her sophomore year, and she was also a member of the choir and the All-States Chorus. According to some classmates, she was a very soft-spoken, sweet little girl who was very protective of her sister Elizabeth. She was the one who would always rescue her sister from the abuse that they both went through as children. Their mother was quite something else, let's put it that way. Elizabeth, who was younger than Louise, often mentioned that Louise was her protector, and she was the one that shielded her from the sexual abuse, and she was just like the one that was always there for her and cared for her. So Louise had a lot of things going on in her childhood that no other child should go through, and it was just a lot for her, and it started to weigh on her a lot as she got older. And especially when she became a teenager, that's when her life really started to change, and her sisters were noticing this a lot. She was starting to have really dark, depressing thoughts. She started to dab into witchcraft and snake rituals and just really dark rituals. Her sisters often were concerned for her, as her characters and demeanor changed quite a bit. She just wasn't the same person she was when they were children, which makes sense. She had a lot going on in her life, and she didn't really have anybody to talk to. Her mother was never really there. Her father was in and out of their lives quite a bit. He was a preacher, so he had a really strict household, but he was not there some of the time, and so she didn't really have anybody to talk to. Growing up in a teenager, young adult, she started experimenting with snakes and witchcraft. Those things started becoming more and more a part of her life, and she started becoming very depressed and very angry, and her sister really noticed that her character changed when she became a young adult. Her family was also really religious, so she did come from a very strict household, so that also weighed a lot on her shoulders as well. And like I said, her father was there, and then he wasn't there, and then her mother was never there for her. So yeah, she didn't really have a decent childhood. You or I or anybody I know had. It was just a horrible upbringing, and you kind of feel bad for her in a way.
So far, yes.
So far, yes. Louise just wanted to get away from that life and be more independent and just try to like make something of herself. This is where David comes in. He, on the other hand, has a totally different story. His upbringing was like his family were a Christian family. They were quite wealthy. David was quite smart. He was like top of his class in high school. He was also part of the Bible club. He was part of the chess club, the science club, the a cappella choir in high school. But he was also like very much a nerd in high school and like a homebody. He kept to himself. But he was super smart and super intelligent and just the total opposite of Louise and her family. He went on to study, after high school, he went on to study engineering at Virginia Tech, and he landed a very high-profile job at Lockheed Martin, which is just like pretty sure it's a computer IT company. Like I said, David and Louise came from a religious family, so they met at church when Louise was 16 and David was 24. And right away, Louise had fallen madly in love with David. Someone she could talk to, someone she could confide in, and just to get away from her life at home. So it didn't take them long before things started to get serious with them. But one of the things that was holding them back was that they had to keep the relationship a secret because Louise's father did not approve of his daughter dating an older man. Like I said, because David was 24 at the time when they met. And because Louise's father was a preacher, he didn't think it was a good idea. He didn't really trust David, and he didn't want his daughter dating. So I'm not quite sure.
And how old was Louise when she met David?
16, and he was 24. So there's quite a big age difference there. But one of the things that they did share together was that, like I said, they're both religious, but both of the families were part of the Pentecostal faith. Do you guys know what that is? Or did anybody know what that is? Like what type of religion that is?
No, not really. I don't really know about religion.
Well, it's
part of the Christian faith.
Yeah, it's a Christian movement that emphasizes personal experiences with God through baptism and the Holy Spirit. And the term Pentecostal is derived from Pentecost, which is an event that commemorates the descendant of the Holy Spirit upon the following of Jesus Christ. A little education. So yeah, so they met at church and they was secretly dating because Louise's mother didn't want Louise's father finding out. However, Louise's mother was okay with the relationship and she approved of David because of his Christian upbringing and his Christian background. But she didn't tell Louise's father at the time. So things were going pretty well for David and Louise. Like I said, they were young and in love, and they both shared the same religious views and lived in the same town. So they quite often got to see each other. They did go to the same high school, attended the same high school, but obviously not at the same time because David was 8 years older than her. But he did know that she went to the same high school. So one day, David decided to take Louise on a trip to get away. So he decided to go to Louise's school and sign her out her parents knowing this. So basically kidnapping her type thing. She didn't tell her parents and he didn't tell anyone that he was gonna take her out of school. So they went on this wild 1,000-mile road trip to Texas and just spent the whole day together. Just kind of wanted to get away from their lives really and just be alone and be free, I guess. But that little charade stopped because Louise's parents reported her missing. And when her dad found out who she was with at the time, you think he'd be super upset, but he actually wasn't. He just wanted her to come back, and the reason why they went away at the beginning because they wanted to elope and get married and not tell anybody about it and just kind of just leave and never come back, but obviously it didn't happen. So when they came back to West Virginia, his father came to grips with the idea that Louise really loved David and he could see that she was finally a happier person. So he agreed to let them get married. So they got married in 1985. So for a few years they lived in West Virginia. And Louise's younger sister, Elizabeth, didn't really like David. They never really got along. She just thought he was just really odd. So when Louise and David decided to move back to Texas to start their life together, Elizabeth was not happy that Louise was moving. She was always the one that she could talk to, and she just didn't want her to move away. So when they moved and got settled into Texas, Elizabeth wanted to be close to her sister. So she asked if she could come live with them in the summertime. And at this point, this was like a couple years later, they had about 3 children at the time when Elizabeth decided to go there for the summer. So she was really excited. She got to visit her niece and nephew, and she got to just hang out with her sister. But when she started living there for a few days, things just weren't going well for Elizabeth. Like, she started noticing David and Louise were pretty strict with their children, mostly with the older daughter. This makes sense because of their upbringing. Like, they came from a fairly religious family themselves, so that strict upbringing would have carried on with them as well. Things just didn't sit right with her. Elizabeth noticed that most of the kids would spend quite a bit of time in their room and would only come downstairs to eat. They would only allowed to eat with the permission of their father. Like, they would have to sit down at the table and they would say a prayer. And when the father said it was good for them to eat, they could eat. But as soon as they were done eating, they had to go back upstairs. So Elizabeth thought that was really odd. They didn't treat her like that, but she just, like, sometimes she'd talk to her niece and nephews, but they never said anything. They never really talked about what was going on. I just find, like, it went from, like, I think things turned pretty quickly once they got married and started having children.
Well, it seems to me like they're strict, but, like, there's nothing that, like, stands out as overly crazy at this point. I mean, they had 13 kids, so they kind of had to run a tight ship or it would be like a shit show.
Yeah, that's true. Like,
but they didn't have 13 kids at that time, did they?
No, they only had 3 at that time, or 4 at that time, sorry. Because as soon as they moved to Texas, they started having children right away. They had 4 children within a few years of each other.
I mean, it kind of seems like weird, like what you were describing, where he was super strict and they were only allowed to, come out of their rooms to eat like a very specific time and stuff like that. So obviously, like, if she was, suspicious of that or a little bit weirded out, but obviously there was nothing glaring to point to, like, anything
and she never
really bad going on.
And in one of the interviews, she did mention that, like, she never really said anything because it's not her house, it's not her children. Like she didn't really have a place to say anything. Like, so she just kind of just didn't really.
Yeah, she wasn't like witnessing.
Ask questions. Yeah,
like she wasn't witnessing like abuse, but she was witnessing that they were strict. But that's not.
Yeah.
It's not her. Like, she doesn't want to, like, judge them on how to raise their children or whatever, even if she thought it was kind of weird.
Yeah, and the time that she did spend with her niece and nephews was a very limited time. She wasn't really allowed to talk to them or even ask them questions about how their day was or just, like, things like that. So there wasn't very much information to give because they didn't really talk much during the whole time she stayed there that summer. But as time went on, Elizabeth said that David and Louise started to drift themselves away from the Pentecostal beliefs. And Elizabeth stated that her sister started to question the people of the church they attended, and they started just not trusting them, starting to becoming, like, quite paranoid of the people of the church. And she did say that Elizabeth was starting to look into other types of religions, like Mennonites or Mormons, or even, like, looking into, like, witch doctors as, like, a type of religion to follow, which I thought was really odd, but it would make sense since when she was younger, she was into witchcraft and stuff like that. So some of the beliefs that Louise was teaching at home. So there was just a mix of different things going on. Like, the kids were just getting involved in all these different religions because she was just trying to figure out which one she wanted to abide by, I guess. David and Louise were starting to have very, very weird dynamics in their relationship, meaning that Louise seemed to be the one more in control as time went on, and David would just sit back and watch, like, so to speak. He would never say anything, and just seems like Louise was running the house more than anything, which just kind of would make sense because we know that she came from a troubled childhood, so maybe she's trying to compensate for that, for being, like, the one who controlled the situation and the outcome, because when she was younger she didn't really have control over what went on in the household. So kind of makes sense to me. As the summer was coming to an end, the things at the Turpin house were getting stranger, and Elizabeth was becoming increasingly more uncomfortable living there. She told a 2020 interview that David started becoming more flirty with her and would comment on her shape and figure and just made her feel uneasy. Louise would just was okay with it, and she kind of went along with it as well. Just a very weird dynamic. One day she was having a shower, so she locked the door behind her, and Louise had come by and unlocked the door. So when Elizabeth came out of the shower, both Louise and David were standing there, and they were watching her get dressed and watching her shower. And she thought that was so strange. She's like, what is going on? She was talking to the 2020 interviewer.
That is so cringe.
She was just, but she kept saying in the interview, he never did touch me. He never did anything sexual towards me. He just would watch me and comment on things. And she just thought it was just getting too creepy, and that Louise was going along with it. Louise would kind of laugh and giggle as it was funny or something. It was strange.
How long did she stay with them? I feel like
just the summer.
Oh my God, I feel
the whole
that's
summer.
That's still too long. Yeah, I would have been out of there pretty early.
So
on.
obviously it wouldn't have been that must have, like you said, I guess that was towards the end of it, because if they were like that the whole time, she would have been pieced out.
Yeah, it was about a couple weeks before she left to go back home.
Maybe they just wanted her to leave, and they we got to creep her out. She's never gonna fucking leave.
I think later on in
freeloading the whole time, get out.
Later on when I get into more of the detail of the case, you'll see why the family became more isolated. So it would make sense that maybe they're trying to kick her out, maybe they're trying to make her uncomfortable. But she also made it very clear that David and Louise never abused the children or abused Elizabeth at all. So according to Elizabeth, yes, there might have been some weird tensions and weird things going on with the family, but they never did once physically abuse the children, so she never really thought anything of it.
Yeah, but there could have been psychological abuse, it feels
True.
like. If they were in the room the whole time and scared to do anything other than that, then that's a different kind of abuse.
So it wasn't soon after that incident that Elizabeth decided to leave the house. And once she did, she never did have contact with her sister or her sister's family again. They just never reconnected again. After the summer, when Elizabeth left, David and Louise went on to have multiple children. After they were done having children, they had a toddler and a 29-year-old. That was the age range of the children. So quite a big age difference. Despite David's good job, the family seemed to be okay, but in reality, they were actually drowning in debt. They couldn't keep their house in Texas. At the end of the summer, they had decided to leave their home and move to a more rural part of Texas, to a little town called Rio Vista. And this town is so small that you can barely find it on the map. I actually went to go look for it, and it's barely there. Since the town was so small, it only had a couple hundred residents, and it was a town that everyone knew everyone knew everyone's business. It kind of reminded me of the town that we grew up in, because it was such a small town. Everybody knew everybody thought they knew everybody's business. So the Turpins moved to this little town, and things seemed to be going okay. One of their neighbors' daughters would often come over to play with the younger children. But over time, as the years went on, the children were seen less and less outside. One day the neighbors would knock on the door, and Louise would answer the door and say the children couldn't come and play. As time went on again, the knocks just went unanswered. Nobody ever answered the door. And it wasn't until one day when the neighbor went over again to try to see if the kids could come outside, she peeked into the window and she saw the youngest toddler there, and just in a playpen, just there, and she noticed that the child wasn't, there's no parents around. The child was there for hours on just left unattended. Nobody was paying attention to her. She wasn't she hadn't left the playpen, and this was hours that went by. So nobody would answer the door, so she couldn't really see anything was going on. So she just brushed it off and didn't really think about it. She never really did see the kids after that. They kind of just isolated themselves from the whole community. They never did ask any questions. They never did become suspicious of the of the family, like why they would never see them outside. Like if that was me, I would kind of want to know what's going on. Like you live in such a small town, everybody knows everybody, and all of a sudden you have this family who moves in and you don't really know them, you don't really know what they're like, and all of a sudden you don't see their kids outside playing, and to me that just seems really odd. But
yeah, it was just this thing. I feel like people are so afraid to, say something and be wrong, and then like the shame that they would feel if they like reported it to the police and everything turned out to be fine. So they would rather just not say anything than risk being wrong, which is so weird because obviously in hindsight, if they had said something, then probably would have spared the kids a lot of mental anguish. So I don't know, it's just weird.
Yeah, or like when people feel like, oh, somebody else will do something about it. Like if something's going on, they'll feel like, oh, somebody else will probably notice and they'll call the police if needed. Like you always hear those stories about a huge group of people and nobody calls the cops because they feel like somebody else is going to do it. So maybe it's that kind of mentality too, where it's like someone else is going to notice and fix this, so I don't have to.
Yeah, they're like, oh, well, if we're noticing it, then everyone else must be noticing it too, so someone else will do something. And it's kind of just like the bystander effect, I think it is, where...
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
When the neighbors didn't see the kids outside, and one of the neighbors in the 2020 interview said that behind the Turpin's house, there was this big wide trailer. One of those like kind of like RV trailers. The family just was living in that trailer and not in their house. So could you imagine like 13 kids and like they're living in that trailer for weeks and then they'll go back to the house and they'll live in the trailer for the weeks and go back to the house. So that was kind of strange. Anybody have any thoughts like why they would just move back and forth like that?
I have no idea, but I mean, I feel like trying to rationalize what they were doing is a fool's errand at this point.
Yeah. So in 2010, the family had become so in debt and couldn't keep up with their bills and their lifestyle that their house became a foreclosure and they were forced to move out of their home, leaving everything behind. Like they didn't take anything with them, and they moved to California, and that was the last time anyone in Texas saw or heard from the Turpins again. And it wasn't until after the family had moved away, that someone had repossessed the house for property, I guess. So when they went to look in the house, they noticed the bunk beds in the room. There was like 13 desks in another room lined up like a schoolroom. The house smelled awful. The walls were very dirty. And there was like stuff on the wall, like religious stuff on the wall. And the person who repossessed this house kept those photos for 20 years. I don't know why anybody would keep those photos for that long. I did send you guys pictures of the house.
Yeah, so did the person that took over the house, did they not like contact the police to be like,
No.
This is... Why?
Because nobody knew who they were. Because after they left Texas, nobody...
Yeah, but there must be a record of that. Like, they could say the people who lived in this house. Like, they could find records of that.
Well,
Like, it's
Yeah,
just
like
weird.
they owned the house, did they not? Because if there has to be a record.
I couldn't find one in the house, and the guy who had the house did an interview, and he said that he tried contacting people to find out where they were and who they were. Because they never did say their last name. Nobody knew who they were when they lived there. So
Yeah, the bank knew who they were to repossess their house. Like,
yeah,
fucking
nobody-
contact the bank.
yeah, and nobody
Nobody cared enough, obviously.
No, nobody cared enough. No.
But yeah, I saw the pictures that you sent, and they were disgusting. It was
Yeah,
like the house, like they were living in squalor, basically.
So once they moved back to California, this was in 2012. Louise's father after he retired, he tried to contact his daughter, and he dreamed about going to see his daughter and visit his grandchildren in California. But when he told Louise of his plans, Louise told him not to come, and this really hurt her father. He just wanted to see his grandchildren. He wanted to be part of their lives, but Louise just didn't want anything to do with her family. Which
Can you really
kinda,
blame her? Like,
it doesn't. Yeah, I don't really blame her. And the same went with her mother. Like, before her mother died, she begged for Louise to come visit her, but she never did. She refused to come visit her, and I don't blame her for that because her mother was not a very nice person. Her mother,
I would be kind of suspicious and weirded out if she did go, like after what her mother did. It's kind of weird.
her mother did die in 2016, And then 3 months later, her father died. So she never did go visit them at all. She never showed up for the funerals. When her other sister, Teresa, asked why she didn't come, all Louise said was that they prayed for her and that she had a bad dream saying not to go visit. That was essentially the last time Louise's family heard from them again. So no one heard from the Turpins for a few years, and people thought they were just living in this fantasy life in California. Like, Louise would post pictures of the family at Disneyland and in Vegas and on social media. It seemed like their family had a good life. Louise's older sister, Teresa, believed that she was happy. She was just like a facade. All these pictures of the kids looking healthy, the kid dressed in nice clothing and at Disneyland and Vegas. And so it wasn't until January of 2018 when a 911 call came from one of the Turpin children. I will play you the 911 call. Yeah, so I'll play that.
911, state your emergency.
No, yes, I'm still here.
What's your name?
Gordon Turpin. I've never been out. I don't go out much, so I don't know anything about the streets or anything. Okay, I live in a family of 15 people, and my parents are abusing. They abuse us, and my two little sisters right now are chained up. There's 13 kids, and then a mother and father.
And how many of your siblings are tied up?
2 of my sisters, 1 of my brothers.
How are they tied up, with rope or with what?
With chains. They're chained up to their bed.
Do you think anybody in the house will need to go to the hospital?
I'm not sure. Sometimes we live in stilts, and sometimes I wake up and I can't breathe because how dirty the house is.
When was the last time you had a bath?
I don't know, almost a year ago. But sometimes I feel so dirty. I wash my face and I wash my hair.
Does anybody at the house take any kind of medication?
Oh, I don't know what medication is.
Are you homeschooled?
No, we don't do school. Our mother tells people we're homeschooled. Our mother tells people we're private schools, and she has a fake private school set up. But we don't really do school. I haven't finished first grade, and I'm 17. I don't know much about my mother. She doesn't like us. She doesn't spend time with us ever.
Pretty crazy. I just noticed that it sounds like a small child on the 911 call, but she's much older than she sounds, which is crazy. But yeah, it's sad to hear everything that she's describing, and yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, when you're listening to it, she tells them that she's 17, which is crazy when you're listening because she sounds like she's 7. And yeah, and I remember when I was listening to it and watching news reports and stuff just on YouTube, and they were saying some people or they were thinking that it was almost a joke at first just because it was so hard to believe.
Yeah, I had read something that just the way she was talking and the way she was pronouncing words just seemed like she wasn't a much younger child. So it shocked me when I found out that she was 17. And it also shocked the police officers too to find out the 17-year-old girl when it sounds like she's literally sounds like she's 5 or 6 years old. So yeah, so she calls 911. The daughter said that she'd been planning her escape for weeks. And when she knew her parents were not around, that's when her and one of her younger siblings decided to escape. But not too far into the escape, the younger sibling got too scared and went back home. But the 17-year-old kept going until she could find a place far enough from the house. That's when she made that 911 call. So that in itself is brave, because when the police officer on the other line is asking her about where she lives or what's around her, she doesn't know because she hasn't been outside for who knows how long. So she didn't even know what a police officer was. She had no idea when they mentioned that what that person was. She had no idea where she lived. She had no idea her address. So for her to make a 911 call was pretty brave of her to know, even though she had no details to back it up with.
So how did she? So she called them from outside the house, right?
Yes.
She took there was a cell phone, I guess. Somewhere?
Yeah, she took us one of they had cell phones in the house. She took one. So yeah, like I said, she lives such a sheltered life that it was even amazing that she even knew how to call 911.
So yeah, when you hear that like 911 call and she's saying that she doesn't even know what medication is, I find it like amazing that all of these kids even lived as long as they did, because I feel like if any of them had any kind of really serious sickness as a kid, they wouldn't have gotten the medical care that they needed. So it's just kind of crazy and really lucky, I guess, in a way, that they didn't have some sort of serious illness growing up.
Yeah, because obviously they probably would have been hesitant to bring them to the hospital if they were really sick, because then the doctors are going to notice that there's signs of child abuse and stuff, right? So they probably wouldn't have been taken to the hospital. But then if they were given medicine at home, then they would probably know what medicine was, would they not? So obviously if she had no idea what medicine even was, obviously she never received any as a child, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, I thought that too at the time when I was reading about the case, like how these children just survived in just the conditions they lived in and not having any type of medical care. Or it mentioned that like they weren't allowed to wash past their wrists. They could only bath once a year, and they never went to the dentist. They never went to the doctors. So like it's even amazing like that they even survived as long as they did. So once the police arrived at the house, nothing could prepare them for what they saw when they walked in. The house smelled like dead animals. There was like dead cats all around. There was like a dead dog there. There was like fecal matter on the floor because the kids were chained up to their beds for like weeks on end, so they never went to the bathroom. The house was so dirty and you could barely like breathe in the house. You had to wear like masks. It just was awful. There were locks and chains on the beds, fridges, and cupboards. And the children ranged from toddler to 29 years old. And according to one of the reports, the 29-year-old only weighed 82 pounds. The kids at this time were taken by child services, and then both David and Louise were arrested. No child, or not even an animal, should ever have to live in those conditions. It's disgusting to me. Like, I can't even fathom you make your children live in that.
It's crazy to think that like there's a 29-year-old that lived there and he didn't, that's just how he grew up and that's just like what he knew, and he wasn't able or didn't know enough to like get out of that situation. And just to think about like just the mental health issues that they must have to live like that and just think that that's what life is. It's crazy to think of.
Yeah, it's crazy because obviously like they grew up like this. This was all they knew, and they didn't really socialize with other kids much by the sounds of it. They barely went outside. So obviously they had enough foresight to know like she escaped the house to go call 911. So obviously she knew what they were doing was not good, or not, it would have been all of that they ever knew. So now even like they're away from it now, but like you said, the mental health issues that are going to come up because of this, like the trauma that they're going to have to deal with, and it's sad to think.
Yeah, like imagine living like that, and then as Steph said, one of the other girls tried to escape too, but then got scared and she ran back. Like that was her comfort, was to go back home rather than to, get out into this world that she had never experienced. So that is just crazy to think of, like, just, yeah. Ugh.
She was more scared to go out into the world and attempt this call than she was to go back into the hell that she was living in.
Yeah, it's just so sad to think of. I can't imagine at all.
And 29 years, like that's such a long time too for the oldest one. Like that's so long.
When I was reading more about the case and like the living conditions, it went on to say that like their growths were stunted, like the older ones were stunted because of the starvation and just the malnourished and not just the abuse and stuff, that they were actually referred to as children because they looked like children. Like the 29-year-old only weighed 82 pounds. I guess.
Well, yeah, like that's like, I would say maybe like a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Depending. But yeah. And I mean, I guess if you're 29 and you only weigh that much, you're probably just exhausted all the time. You don't even have the energy to think about like getting out of the house and running for your life, because you don't even have the energy or probably the mental energy to even, think about how to do that, because you're starving. So you can't even physically do it.
If the girl who went out and made the call, if she was caught in the act, like who knows what she would have undergone then. So it was really brave for her to actually attempt to do that, and she basically saved them all with that, making that one call.
Yeah, they could all still be in that situation if it wasn't for her right now still. So she's definitely a hero for sure.
Because they were so isolated from the world, nobody really knew who they were. So yeah, like you said, if she never made that call, we probably wouldn't be talking about this case right now because we probably wouldn't known about it.
When you tell this story, I think that like happened before the time of like social media and all that stuff, where it was easier for people to be isolated and nobody to know about you. But like this day and age, to have something like that happen, it just seems like crazy because so many, it's just everyone's connected to everything.
But and you said too that like she was posting on social media a lot too. So like from the outside, it looked like it was a normal family, right? Because there was pictures of them at Disneyland and in Vegas and stuff. So obviously they did go out into the world, but I don't know. Obviously it's very different. Like just kind of goes to show you that like what people put on social media isn't really the reality in a lot of ways. I'm not saying that everyone is living like this just on social media, but you know.
So going back to like when the police went to their house, like after they took the kids into child services and David and Louise were arrested, the child services wanted statements from the children, like just to tell like what went on and like just describe the situation. And they also noticed when they were going through the house and stuff like that they had found some journals that some of the children had written, and every day they just described their life and how painful and like sad they were. And just reading these journals, the police say it was just heartbreaking because these were children trying to reach to some, like just trying to like write down their feelings so anybody ever found them, they could help them out.
I'm surprised that the parents would have even given them journals. If they were thinking, that could be used as evidence against them? Obviously it was. You know, if their children are writing their real thoughts down. I'm surprised they even allowed them to do that.
They did, and that was shocked me too. I'm like, where would they get these journals? But maybe they just snuck them. Maybe they hid them, like they would find them and just hide them somewhere the parents couldn't find, and then just write in them at nighttime. One of the Turpin kids said that like they never did do anything school-wise. Like she never passed grade 1 and she was 17. That's what she says in the 911 call. So she never did get past grade 1. Like I said, like they even found like a video of one of the Turpin kids singing a song, and she just looks so like, I think it showed on one of the documentaries or like one of the news outlets that her singing a song, and she just looked like she was sad and so like malnourished. And the fact that she even made a video was in secret was crazy to me. Katie, when you said they were abused for like that when she was 29, being abused for all that time, it actually says they were only being abused for 9 years. I mean, that's still a long time. Like that's still more brutal part of their like abuse started later on in their lives.
But also too, isn't there that thing that's called, what is it, like, I don't know, is it Stockholm syndrome or something? It's like where your abuser, you start like, you become, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but you almost become familiar and comfortable with your abuser, and you become like it's your safe place, even though it's abuse.
Yeah, that's like when people get kidnapped and then eventually they can go out in public with their kidnappers and just like not tell anybody and just walk around and go back home with them, just because that's just their mindset now. So I guess I feel like you said they only started being abused for like 9 years, but there must have been some sort of abuse for this like 20-year-old to be so compliant with everything and then stay in those conditions until he was almost 30.
Yeah, maybe he was like just didn't know who to turn to or where to go. Like he could have escaped, but since he was so like uneducated, and maybe he just didn't have any place to go. It didn't really talk about.
Okay, well that's abuse right there. If they weren't in school and they weren't being homeschooled properly for their whole life, so there's definitely stuff going on.
Like the police were saying that like when they took them into child services, like a lot of them had to be trained how to use bathroom facilities because none of them knew how, because they were chained to their beds for God knows how long, and they never actually physically used an actual bathroom. Like it breaks my heart to think like 13 kids, like fuck, if they ever like, thankfully they didn't have any more kids after the 13th one, but still.
It's so disgusting though. Can you imagine that many people not being able to use the bathroom? Like, remember we have like a dog and it like shits on the floor and it's like so gross, like nobody wants to go near it or touch it. Like I can't imagine like that's just your whole life, and it's like multiplied by like 20. Like, oh.
And there was like dead animals in their house too. It's so gross.
So like, why did they do this? What happened to make them just start being like, well, this sounds like a good idea. We're going to start abusing our children, and we're also going to have more children and then abuse them. Like it just. So, like, does it ever explain what was going through their mind?
It doesn't really explain why they did it, but
Well, also in a lot of cases too, they always say that abused people become abusers later in their life. So if she was, she didn't have a great upbringing and she was very abused as a child. So that's kind of, she gets conditioned to that.
Yeah, I almost think that like when there was like they had 13 children, they didn't have a lot of money, so they were trying to like make things work, but then it just got too overwhelming for them, and they just started going sideways.
It's interesting though, like when you think of some people and they go through horrible things like this, they're like dead set on like breaking that cycle, and like they make sure their kids have like the best life possible, and they're like an advocate for abuse. And then others are like, it's almost their mission to make sure somebody suffers the way they did. You know what I mean? Like I want, like, where is that, line, and like who crosses it? And it's super interesting.
Like it's weird to see like where
some
the two
people
paths
flip,
kind of
like,
diverge. Like what
yeah.
happened, or like how does it? Some people go along that path and the other ones go along the other one.
Mm-hmm.
When they both have like this similar background.
Yeah, it's super interesting.
Once David and Louise were arrested, they were charged with 14 felony charges. These charges were cruelty to an adult dependent, false imprisonment of a child cruelty, and torture. They had like their sentencing hearing was in 2019. Because they pleaded guilty, there was no trial. But the Turpin children did make statements to their parents at their sentencing hearing. One of them said in their statement that my parents took my life from me. Another one saying, like, I'm a fighter, I'll shoot for the stars, which means like she's gonna go far in life. One of their sons forgave his parents for what they did and said that he loved them. Another statement read that I forgive my parents for what they did. They did the best they could raising 13 children. Can't be easy, and I'm glad for how they treated me because it makes me a better person and stronger person today.
Yeah, that's so, like, I don't know, that's such a bizarre way to look at it. I mean, obviously, maybe it's just easier to forgive because it can't change the past, so maybe it'll be easier on her going forward to just forgive, but that takes a lot of strength to be able to say that kind of stuff about those people who did that, to all of them.
And yeah, maybe for them to be able to move on, they have to forgive their parents. And
I don't know if I'd be able to do that though, like having to endure, especially with a 29-year-old, like his 29 years of his life is miserable and abused, so to be able to say that. I mean, I guess some of them didn't though, like she just read some of the other statements, so obviously not all of them are on the same page, but I don't know, I just think it's miraculous that even any of them would be able to say things like that, to like forgive them.
After they gave the statement, both David and Louise addressed their children in the court, and when Louise was giving her statement, she looked calm and collective. She didn't look like she cared. It just seemed odd, just seemed creepy to me, and she didn't really seem like apologetic really for what she did. The children's lawyer said in court that the kids are not looking back but looking forward. They are working on their schooling, their mental and physical health, and learning basic life skills. Because so much of their life was taken away from them, they never did get the proper education they needed. They also addressed in court by Louise Turpin's attorney that during this whole court process, 10 of the children were given 10 years restraining order against the parents, and 2 of them were 5 years and 1 of them was 1 year. It didn't really go into much detail, like I'm not sure, like the restraining order is not going to really do much if they go to jail, so it's not like, I guess they can't have contact with them at all during the time they're in jail. I guess what I'm getting at is like the safety, like the restraining orders were put in place just for like a safety precaution. Because there was no trial, the sentencing hearing was pretty quick. Once the hearing was over, Louise and David were sentenced to life in prison with no possibility for parole for 25 years. But because of the severity of their crime, they're likely to deny parole, so it's essentially a life sentence. David is serving his time at California State Prison, and Louise is serving her time at Central California Omens facility. Louise has tried to contact her sister Elizabeth from prison, but her sister has no interest in seeing her. She told reporters that nothing her sister can say will make it okay, and that her sister has changed so much that she's not even the same person she once was. She also went to go visit David, and she also said that David is having a really hard time in prison, and he's living with regret and remorse for what he did. She said that Louise didn't seem to have any remorse and is living in like this la la land, according to her sister. Louise's sister Elizabeth went on to write a book about her sister's life leading up to the Turpin being arrested, and it's called Sisters of Secrets.
It's so crazy, like, to think that parents, and obviously, you know, Louise is living in La La Land in jail. Obviously, she has some mental health issues, and, you know, from the amount of torture and abuse that she probably suffered as a child herself, she has a lot of issues that she has to work out. So hopefully in jail she can do that and, I don't know, rehabilitate. But yeah, she's probably not getting out of prison anyway because of how heinous the crime was. So
yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, she just has such a messed up life herself that she just couldn't get past that, and it just unfortunately made it worse for her children as well.
I don't want to say, I mean, maybe happy is not the right word, but I mean, I guess a happy ending. I mean, they all survived it. Could have been a lot worse, you know, the abuse and neglect that they suffered. Surprised that none of them got severely ill or died as a result. So, I mean, they all came out alive, which is good, but they're just not going to have an easy future. That's for sure.
And you hope that, like, if they go on and do have like kids and like have a family, that they don't repeat the same pattern as what happened to them, because then the cycle just keeps continuing on, and it just from generation to generation. Yeah,
intergenerational trauma is a thing, and obviously I think that's part of, you know, Louise suffered it in her childhood, so she brought that upon her children. So like you said, hopefully they don't pass that on.
And yeah, and we don't know if her parents or her mother suffered that when she was a kid too. Like, it never really did say. So like, it could have been from like her mother, and it could have just been like kept going like that.
Yeah, it's crazy. So that does it for this episode of Crime Family. Pretty crazy case. But if you like what you hear, then please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast streaming app. Give us, you know, a review and a rating if you can. And also, the amazing music that you've heard throughout the podcast is done by the awesome Tim Monis. You can follow him on Instagram at Tim Monis. You can find us on Instagram as well at Crime Family Podcast. We're also on Twitter at Crime Family Pod 1. And we also are now on Facebook, so you can find us at Crime Family Podcast on Facebook. And we now also have a email, so you can, if you want to just give us your feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Or if you have a case suggestion, just email us at crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com, and we will get back to you, and maybe we will do the case that you suggest for us. So lots of ways to interact with us and finding us on social media. So we thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back next week with an all new episode. Take care.